The chip was warm in my palm when the alien died. I had been on the Vela Primus for 6 days when it happened, and in those 6 days I had smiled at creatures with 4 eyes and shaken hands that had too many fingers, and nodded along to speeches I did not fully understand. I had eaten food that tasted like copper and lavender mixed together, and I had pretended to enjoy it. I was good at pretending. The United Earth Nations had not sent me across 40 light-years of empty space because I was bad at pretending. His name, I later learned, was DECEIVE. He was a Vreth, which meant he was small, insect-like, and completely harmless-looking. The Vreth were one of 14 species, currently living under the Conclave's wing, as they called it. Protected, they said. Guided. Uplifted. I had read the briefings about all of them on the 6-week journey here, and I had found the Vreth to be one of the quieter races. They kept to themselves. They did not speak much at diplomatic functions. They had been part of the Conclave for over 300 years. So when DECEIVE stepped out from behind a service column in Corridor 7 of the Eastern Residential Ring, blocking my path with his small gray body and his 4 trembling arms, I stopped walking. Not because I was frightened, because something in the way he moved told me he was. He pressed the chip into my hand with his upper 2 arms. His lower arms were folded tight against his thorax, the way I had read that Vreth held themselves when they were in extreme distress. His compound eyes, each one a deep red color, looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. And then he said it. 2 words. Broken English. The kind you get from a translation implant that was not installed correctly or was very old. 2 words that did not sound like a warning at first, because they sounded so quiet. He said, "They know." Then his legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto the floor of Corridor 7, and when I knelt down beside him and pressed my fingers to the side of his neck, where I had been told the Vreth had a pulse point, there was nothing. His eyes were still open, still red, still looking somewhere past me. I closed my hand around the chip. I looked both ways down the corridor. It was empty. The Vela Primus had surveillance in most public areas, but Corridor 7 was a service passage, one of the older ones, and I had noticed on my second day that the ceiling sensors in this particular stretch had a blind angle if you stood within 3 meters of the column. I had not told anyone. I noticed that I was good at noticing things quietly. I straightened up, put my hands behind my back, and walked calmly to my quarters. I did not run. Running in a space station full of aliens who had just welcomed humanity into their civilization would have been strange. And strange was the last thing I could afford to be right now. My name is Yael Okafor. I am 38 years old, born in Lagos, raised partly in London, trained in Geneva, and I hold the rank of commander in the United Earth Nations Diplomatic Corps. I have negotiated trade deals with 3 regional powers on Earth, sat in rooms where people wanted to hurt each other, and made them shake hands instead, and once spent 11 days in a collapsed tunnel in the Andes, with no communication, and a broken leg, waiting to be found. I am not easy to frighten. But as I sat on the edge of my bunk in my quarters on the Vela Primus, and turned that chip over in my fingers, I was not frightened so much as I was very, very focused, because in my experience, fear and focus feel almost identical, and the only difference is which one you let drive. The chip was standard galactic format. I had a reader for it, because we had been given readers along with a dozen other useful tools when we first came aboard, part of the welcome package. I had 3 colleagues with me on this mission: Lieutenant Dan Carr, who handled security, Dr. Nina Patel, our xenobiologist and the best scientific mind I had ever personally known, and Corporal Owen Webb, who handled communications and who, in his spare time, was the most gifted cryptographer the UEN had produced in a generation. I knocked on Owen's door first. He was already at his console when I entered, because Owen was always at his console. He had a cup of something warm, probably the Earth coffee substitute we had brought with us, and he was running routine frequency checks on our comms array. He was 26 years old, and he looked about 19, and he had a habit of humming very softly to himself when he worked. He was humming when I walked in. I placed the chip on the console beside his cup without saying anything. He looked at it. He looked at me. He stopped humming. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "A Vreth gave it to me," I said. "In Corridor 7, he died immediately after." Owen picked up the chip very carefully. The way you pick up something that might be fragile. He turned it over. Died how? I don't know yet, I said. Natural causes, maybe. Or not. I pulled my chair close to his console and sat down. I need you to read it without leaving any trace on the station network. Can you do that? He was already working. You know the answer to that, he said, and he was not being arrogant, just accurate. Give me a few minutes. I gave him 11 outside the viewport in his room. The star field was very still. The Vela Primus was in a stable orbit above a gas giant, whose name in galactic standard translated roughly to the patience of deep water. I had thought that was a beautiful name when I first heard it. I still did. When Owen turned to face me, his expression was the one I had learned to watch for, not panic, not excitement. The very specific stillness that meant he had found something significant and was deciding how to say it. It's encrypted in 3 layers, he said. 2 of them are galactic standard encryption, which I can crack. The 3rd layer is something else. It looks like Vreth ceremonial encoding, the kind they use for historical records they want to preserve intact across centuries. How long to open all 3? For someone else? Weeks, maybe months. He turned back to the console. For me, probably 6 hours. Do it, I said. Offline. Nothing touches the station network. He nodded. I stood up, and then I stopped in the doorway. Owen, I said. Yes, Commander? Whatever is on that chip, I said. The Vreth who gave it to me died so that it would reach us. He chose us specifically, a dying alien, on a station full of species, chose to give this to a human. I paused. That means something. Owen looked at me for a moment. Then he looked back at his console. I know, he said quietly. I'll work fast. I went back to my room, and I lay down on my bunk, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the look in DECEIVE's eyes. In the 2 seconds before he collapsed, he had not looked afraid. Exactly. He had looked like someone who had made a decision after a very long time of being afraid, and had come out the other side of it into a kind of exhausted calm. I had seen that look on human faces before, in the tunnel in the Andes, on the faces of people who had decided they were going to keep going, even when they probably should not. It was the look of someone who had chosen to trust. The next morning, at the daily diplomatic welcome session, I sat beside High Arbiter Cecil Vane, and I smiled at all the right moments. Cecil Vane was the Conclave's lead diplomat, their senior-most voice in all matters of interspecies relations. He was a Yanari, which meant he was tall, 6-limbed, with a face that was almost human in its arrangement but not quite, the way a reflection in water is almost accurate. He had a deep, calm voice, and an extraordinary ability to make you feel, when he spoke to you, that you were the most interesting person in the room. He told me that humanity's inclusion in the Conclave was the most exciting development of the past century. He said that the Conclave had been watching us for decades, and had been enormously impressed by our resilience, our creativity, our drive. He said that the technology being shared with us would transform our civilization, open up the stars, bring us into the great family of galactic peoples. I said thank you. I said it was an honor. I said that humanity looked forward to learning from all of the great species of the Conclave. And while I said all of that, with a perfectly level voice and a perfectly warm smile, I was thinking about DECEIVE, and what it meant that he had died in Corridor 7 of the Eastern Residential Ring, with a chip in his hand that he had been carrying for who knew how long, waiting for exactly the right moment and exactly the right species. They know, he had said. I was starting to think I needed to find out what they knew, and whether they were right to be afraid of it. That evening, Owen knocked on my door. He was holding his tablet pressed against his chest, and his face was the color of someone who had not slept, and had also just read something that rearranged the furniture inside his head. You should call Dan and Nina, he said. All of us need to hear this together. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the chip. I thought about DECEIVE's eyes. I thought about Cecil Vane's warm, careful, practiced smile. Yes, I said. I'll get them now. And that was the last night any of us slept well on the Vela Primus. Owen pulled up the first file at 11 minutes past midnight, station time. The 4 of us sat in a half circle around his console, close enough that our shoulders were nearly touching, and the light from the screen made everyone look pale and sharp. "I'm going to summarize the first section," Owen said, "because the raw data is about 4,000 pages, and most of it is in Vreth ceremonial script, which is beautiful, but very slow to read. The summary is enough to start with. After that, you can all read the sections yourselves." He looked at me. I nodded. He looked back at the screen. "The chip contains records compiled by a Vreth archivist named DECEIVE of the Fourth Hive," he began, "spanning approximately 240 years of personal and institutional observation aboard the Vela Primus. DECEIVE was not a random station worker. He was the Conclave's senior records keeper for this station for most of his adult life. He had access to files that no one outside the Conclave's inner governing circle was ever supposed to see. Dan Carr, who had been a military officer for 15 years and had the face to prove it, said nothing. He just folded his arms. "The first category of records," Owen continued, "covers what the Conclave internally calls the Managed Species Accord. It is not a publicly known document. It has never been published in the Galactic Archive. It has never been mentioned in any of the welcome briefings given to newly inducted species. It predates the current form of the Conclave by roughly 5,000 years, and it has been renewed, in secret, by each successive governing body. Nina Patel, who had a habit of pressing her fingers together when she was processing difficult information, pressed them together now. "What does it say?" she asked. Owen read it directly. "Any species classified as having significant volatile potential upon first contact is to be inducted into the Conclave under a framework of controlled engagement. They are to be given access to technology sufficient to meet their immediate developmental needs, but no more. All provided technology is to contain dependency mechanisms that ensure the inducted species cannot achieve independent operation without Conclave support. Inducted species are to be monitored continuously. They are to believe, at all times, that they are equal and willing partners in the Conclave. They are never to be informed of their classification." The room was very quiet after that. Outside the viewport, the gas giant turned slowly in the dark. "How many species," I said carefully, "are currently under this framework?" 14, Owen said. "Including us. Humanity was classified as high volatile potential within 11 days of first contact. The decision to induct us under the Managed Accord was made before the first diplomatic delegation even landed on the station." Dan made a sound. It was not a word exactly. More like the sound a person makes when they step on something they did not expect to find in the dark. "The technology," Nina said. Her voice was very even, very controlled, which meant she was working to keep it that way. "Tell me about the dependency mechanisms." Owen pulled up a second file. "The FTL drives they gave us. They look like a gift. They work exactly as demonstrated, but each one contains a secondary control layer that the Conclave can activate remotely. When activated, every human ship using a Conclave-provided FTL drive goes dead simultaneously. Propulsion, navigation, life support, everything tied to the drive architecture." He paused. "Every ship, all at once." I looked at the ceiling for a moment. We had 47 vessels currently operating on Conclave-provided FTL drives. 47 ships, with crews, out in space, right now. I brought my gaze back down. "What happened to the other 13 species?" I asked, "when they were inducted?" Owen hesitated for the first time all night. That hesitation told me more than whatever he was about to say. "One of them found out," he said. "About 3,000 years ago, a species called the Cathara. They were roughly where we are now. 6 years into their induction, one of their scientists figured out the dependency mechanism in their energy generation systems. The Cathara went to the Conclave and demanded an explanation." Owen stopped. "The Conclave told them the mechanism was a safety feature. The Cathara did not believe them. They cut communications and began building independent systems. And then," Dan said, "the Conclave activated the mechanism," Owen said. "Not just in the energy systems. In everything. The Cathara's infrastructure shut down across their entire homeworld, and their 3 colony planets, food production, water processing, heating, all of it." Owen looked at the screen. "A species of approximately 4 billion beings lost the infrastructure they depended on to live. In the period that followed, they lost roughly 900 million of their people." No one spoke for a very long time. After that, Owen said quietly. Every species currently in the managed accord knew what had happened to the Kethera. They did not know the details, but the story was allowed to circulate in a certain form. The Kethara tried to leave. The Kethara suffered enormously. The lesson was that resistance was pointless and dangerous, Nina said. They used the suffering of 4 billion people as a warning to everyone else. Yes, Owen said. I had been a diplomat for 14 years. I had sat across tables from people who lied with complete confidence because they had never been caught and could not imagine being caught. I understood, professionally, that deception at scale was a technology like any other, one that sophisticated actors had refined over long periods of time. I understood it intellectually. Sitting in that small room on the Vela Primus, 6 days into humanity's great welcome into the galactic family, I understood it in a different way. The way you understand something when it is pointed directly at you and at everyone you have ever known. I picked up Owen's tablet and read the records myself. All of them, or as much as I could in one sitting. I read about the Vreth, how they had been inducted 400 years ago, how a generation of Vreth scholars had quietly discovered the truth about the managed accord, 150 years in, and how those scholars had made the same choice that DECEIVE made in Corridor 7. They had decided not to fight openly, because that would end like the Kethara. Instead, they had decided to remember, to record, to compile everything they found into a form that could survive them, and to wait for the right species to give it to. The Vreth had apparently debated for decades about which species qualified. Most were too afraid. Most had been in the managed accord long enough that the fear was structural, built into how they thought about themselves. But humanity was new. Humanity had not been here long enough to be shaped by it yet. And apparently, the Vreth who watched us had noticed something. I found the note near the end of the file. It was written in DECEIVE's own hand, or the Vreth equivalent, translated by Owen's program into plain English. It said this: "The humans check things. We have observed the human delegation for 6 days. In 6 days, the human commander has identified the blind angle in the Corridor 7 surveillance. The human communications officer has run frequency analysis on all comms channels without being asked. The human scientist has asked 17 questions about the station's biological filtration systems, which no inducted species has ever inquired about before. And the human security officer found the 4 unmanned access points on the residential ring in under 48 hours. I looked up at Dan. He met my eyes and said nothing. I looked at Nina, who had the expression of someone who had been caught doing their job very well. He was watching us, I said. We were watching him too, Dan said quietly. In a different way. I read the last line of DECEIVE's note. The humans check things. They verify. They do not simply accept what they are told. If any inducted species can survive knowing the truth, it is this one. Give them the records. Trust them to do what we could not. I set the tablet down. The gas giant outside the viewport turned in the dark and said nothing. The station hummed around us, full of sleeping aliens, full of warm corridors and diplomatic schedules and carefully managed illusions. Cecil Vane was 3 floors above us, almost certainly asleep, probably dreaming whatever a Yanari dreamed about, completely unconcerned. Humanity was new and grateful and impressed. Humanity did not know. Of course, humanity did not know. I need to contact Earth, I said. The comms are monitored, Owen said immediately. I know. I thought for a moment. You built an independent channel 3 days ago, didn't you? The one you said was for routine diagnostics. Owen's expression was very careful. I don't know what you mean, Commander. Yes, you do, and I'm glad you did it. I stood up. We're going to send a burst transmission tonight. It is going to be compressed, encrypted, and routed through the diagnostic band, so it reads as system noise. It is going to contain everything on that chip. If they detect it, Dan began. They won't, Owen said, already turning to his console. The humming had stopped. He was fully in it now, the way Owen got when a problem had his complete attention. I built the channel specifically to be undetectable. It'll take about 20 minutes to format the transmission. Do it, I said. And when you're done, get some sleep, all of you. I looked around at their faces in the screen light. Tomorrow morning I have breakfast with Cecil Vane. And I am going to smile at him, the way I have been smiling at him for 6 days, and nothing about my face is going to change, and he is going to tell me how wonderful it is that humanity has joined the great family of the conclave, and I am going to agree with him. And then? Nina asked. And then we wait to hear from Earth, I said. Because this is not our decision alone. This belongs to 8 billion people who do not know yet that someone has been very carefully lying to them. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. We found it out. Now we give them the chance to decide what to do with it. I walked to the door of Owen's room and stopped. DECEIVE waited his whole life to give someone that chip, I said. He chose us because he believed we would not waste it. Let's not waste it. I went to my room. I did not sleep for a long time, but when I finally did, I slept soundly, because the decision had already been made, and making decisions, even hard ones, was the part of the job that I was most sure of. When I woke up, there was a reply from Earth waiting in the diagnostic band. Owen had flagged it with a single word in the message header. The word was, ready. I read the full reply in 4 minutes. Then I read it again. Then I sat on the edge of my bunk for a moment, with my hands on my knees, and the morning light of the station's artificial dawn coming through the viewport. As the reply said, we understand. We believe you. We are already working. Do not change your behavior. Do not give them any reason to look at you differently. We need 47 days. On day 47, we will be ready. On that day, you will know what to do. We trust you. 47 days. I got up, washed my face, put on my uniform, and went to have breakfast with High Arbiter Cecil Vane. He was charming and warm, and full of enthusiasm about the upcoming integration ceremony, which was scheduled for day 53. The ceremony, he explained, would formalize humanity's role as a full partner in the conclave. There would be a signing. There would be celebrations across many worlds. It would be, he said, a wonderful moment for all of us. I agreed that it would be wonderful. I ate the copper and lavender food and smiled across the table at the being who was very carefully and professionally lying to me and to every human being alive, and I counted in my head, 47 days. I could do 47 days. The first week was the hardest. Not because anything went wrong, because nothing did, and that required a specific kind of discipline that most people do not train for. Staying calm when you are in danger is one skill. Staying warm and open and genuinely interested when you know the truth about the people sitting across from you is an entirely different skill. It is the difference between holding still in the dark and dancing in a room where the floor might not hold. I danced. Every morning I had a session with one or more members of the conclave's diplomatic staff, sometimes Cecil Vane himself, sometimes his deputies, sometimes cultural liaison officers from the various member species. I asked questions, I took notes, I expressed admiration and curiosity, and the kind of open-faced wonder that new species were apparently expected to show. I was very good at this. I had been good at it before I knew the truth. Now I was extraordinary at it, because now every conversation had a second layer, a quiet parallel track where I was listening, not just to what they said, but to how they said it, watching for the seams in the story. I found 17 of them in the first week alone. Small things, mostly. The way certain questions were redirected. The way specific technical topics were answered with warmth but no real information. The way 3 different members of the conclave staff used almost identical phrasing when they described the integration ceremony, as if they had all practiced it from the same script. Individually, each one was nothing. Together, they were a picture. Dan found 5 separate unmanned access points that connected the diplomatic wing to the conclave's operational infrastructure. He mapped them all without entering any of them. He reported the locations to Owen, who cataloged them on his personal tablet, which was not connected to any station network. Nina, meanwhile, was asking questions about the FTL drives in a way that could not possibly seem suspicious, because she was a xenobiologist, asking them as if she were merely curious about propulsion physics. She was not curious about propulsion physics. She was building a complete map of the drive architecture and every system connected to it. By day 9, she had found the dependency layer. She identified it by its absence, which was the kind of backwards thinking that made Nina the best scientist I had ever known. She said, "There's a layer of the drive system that performs no function I can identify. It draws minimal power and does nothing, which means it's doing something I'm not supposed to identify. Owen confirmed it within 3 hours using the drive's own diagnostic output. Together they began, very quietly, the process of understanding exactly how the mechanism worked. On day 11, Owen slid a note under my door, handwritten, on paper, which he had specifically brought from Earth for situations where no digital record was acceptable. The note said, "Earth has already started. They have 11 engineering teams on the FTL dependency layer right now. They found the same zero-function layer on day 3. They need 6 more weeks to map it completely and build a bypass that the Conclave cannot detect. Also, they want you to know that public information about the Cathara incident has been quietly filed with the Galactic Archive under a sealed academic submission. The seal will lift automatically on day 47. I read it twice, then I burned it in the small disposal unit in my bathroom and watched it turn to nothing. On day 14, I met Corporal Lena Moss. She was not part of our original team. She arrived on a supply shuttle with 3 other personnel, introduced as a technical specialist, sent from Earth, to assist with cultural documentation. That was her cover. In reality, she was the best intelligence analyst the UEN had available, and Earth had sent her because the situation had grown beyond the scope of a 4-person diplomatic team. She was 29, calm, with dark eyes and a habit of standing very still when she was thinking. She reminded me, faintly, of DECEIVE, not in appearance, in the quality of her attention. She found me on day 15 in the station's botanical recreation area, which had no surveillance because the Conclave had deemed it a private wellness space, presumably because they themselves used it to have conversations they did not want recorded. She sat down beside me on a bench under a plant that had leaves the color of green glass and smelled faintly of rain. "I've been going through the archived records from the chip," she said quietly. "The ones in Vreth ceremonial encoding. Owen cracked the encryption, but he hasn't had time to go through the deeper files. There's a section in there about us specifically, about humanity. What does it say? It says the Conclave has been running detailed analysis on us for 60 years, long before first contact. They have been watching our radio signals, our satellite data, our behavior patterns. They were trying to determine whether we were too volatile to approach, or volatile enough to need managing." She paused. "They classified us as the most potentially disruptive species they had encountered in 4,000 years. I looked at the glass-green leaves. Disruptive how? In the records, the Conclave's original assessment lists several factors," Lena said. "Our population growth rate, our technological acceleration curve, our historical tendency to form large-scale collective movements in response to shared threats." She said the next part very carefully. "And the fact that we write things down, all of us, constantly." The Conclave noted that humanity has more written records per capita than any other species they had studied. Personal records, historical records, scientific records, legal records. "We document everything." She looked at me. "They found that particularly concerning. Because a species that documents everything is harder to deceive," I said. "Harder to deceive completely," she said. "And specifically, harder to deceive over long periods of time. The Conclave's records note that the longer a deception runs, the more data there is to contradict it. And the more data there is, the higher the chance that someone like DECEIVE puts it all together." She folded her hands in her lap. "They knew this was a risk. They believed the controlled induction framework would prevent us from having access to the contradicting data. They believed that if we never saw the seams, we would never pull on the thread." "They underestimated the number of threads we pull," I said. "They underestimated Owen," she said, and there was something that might have been a smile in her voice, though her face stayed still. "And they underestimated you." I thought about that for a moment. "They didn't underestimate us," I said eventually. "They assessed us correctly, and still believed the framework would hold. That's actually more interesting, in a strange way. They knew we were a risk, and they proceeded anyway. Why?" Lena was quiet for a moment. "Because they've done it 14 times, she said. "And it has worked 14 times. Even with the Cathara, it worked in the sense that the lesson was administered and absorbed. They have never failed. And the only thing more dangerous than a capable adversary is a capable adversary who has never lost." I sat with that thought for a while. Thought of the plant with the glass-green leaves moved very slightly in the artificial breeze of the station's environmental system. It smelled like rain. I had not smelled actual rain in 6 weeks. 1 month from now, I said, all of that changes. Yes, Lena said, it does. On day 22, the conclave ran the test. I did not know it was a test until it was over. That was, of course, the point. Cecil Vane called an unscheduled diplomatic session and presented me with what he described as an urgent complication. He said that a human cargo freighter, the UN Aldgate, had apparently entered conclave-designated restricted space near a navigational boundary marker. He said the conclave's border patrol had been forced to issue a warning, and that this had caused considerable concern among 2 of the more cautious member species. He said he was bringing this to me directly and personally, out of deep respect for our partnership, and that he hoped we could resolve it together quickly and quietly. He watched me with his almost human face and his warm, practiced eyes while he said all of this. I took a breath and asked 3 clarifying questions. I expressed appropriate concern. I requested the exact coordinates and timestamp of the incident so I could file a proper report with Earth. I said I was grateful he had come to me directly rather than escalating through formal channels, as that showed real trust between us. None of that was a lie. I genuinely did not know, in that moment, whether the Aldgate incident was real or fabricated, so I responded to it as if it were real, which was the only sensible thing to do. That evening, Owen checked our communication logs and cross-referenced with Earth's shipping schedules. The UN Aldgate had been in dry dock for maintenance for 3 weeks. It had not been anywhere near conclave space. The incident had never happened. Cecil Vane had invented it to see how I would respond. I went to bed that night thinking about how I had responded, checking it against every possible way it could have looked wrong. I found nothing. I had been appropriately concerned without being defensive, cooperative without being eager, grateful without being obsequious. I had been exactly what they expected me to be. On day 23, Owen received a small, quiet technical gift from Earth. It was embedded in a routine maintenance data packet that the station's systems automatically accepted because it looked like a software update for one of our approved communication tools. Inside the packet was a full map of the bypass architecture Earth's engineering teams had built for the FTL dependency layer, adapted specifically for each of the 47 ships currently operating on conclave drives. The bypass could be installed remotely. It had already been installed on 31 ships. The remaining 16 would be done by day 40. Also in the packet, a second note from Earth, again through Owen's hidden channel. This one was longer. It said, "Our people have been in contact with 3 of the other managed species aboard the station. We found them through the chip's records, which identified their senior diplomatic staff by name. We reached out through their own scientific communication channels, which the conclave does not monitor as closely as diplomatic channels. They know. They have been told what we found. They have been told what we plan to do. 2 of them have agreed to participate. The 3rd needs more time. We are giving them time. We also need you to know that the Galactic Archive submission is still sealed and will open automatically on day 47, but we have added a secondary filing, not sealed, already publicly accessible to any species with archive access. It is filed under the category of mathematical analysis, which almost no one reads, because it is an extremely detailed statistical study of the economic output patterns of the 14 managed species versus the 14 species at comparable development stages that were not managed. The study does not make any accusations. It does not use any inflammatory language. It simply presents the numbers. It is very boring to read. It is also completely undeniable. I read that and I almost smiled. Right there in my room, on the Vela Primus, at 1 in the morning, station time. We had spent 47 days building a case so thorough, so documented, so carefully placed in permanent and publicly accessible archives, that no amount of managing could unmake it. Even if something went wrong on day 47, the math was already out there. Anyone with archive access could find it. The Vreth scholars who had dedicated their lives to remembering would have their records permanently preserved. The truth was already out. We just had not announced it yet. On day 31, I sat across from Cecil Vane at the formal mid-integration review dinner, which was a beautiful event in the conclave's great hall, with colored light panels above and a table long enough to seat 40 beings of various sizes. And I listened to him speak about the future with the same warmth, and the same practiced confidence he had always had. He spoke about peace. He spoke about shared knowledge. He spoke about the gift of belonging to something larger than oneself. He was extraordinarily good at his work. I had to give him that. I raised my glass when he raised his. I agreed that the future looked bright. I said that humanity was honored. On day 38, Lena pulled me aside in the wellness garden again and told me that the third managed species, the ones who had needed more time, had agreed. They were ready. On day 40, Owen confirmed that all 47 ships had the bypass installed and tested. The FTL dependency layer was neutralized. Even if the Conclave activated it right now, nothing would happen. 47 ships would keep flying, and their crews would never know how close it had come. On day 46, I sent a message to Earth through Owen's channel. It was 7 words. It said, "Tomorrow, I know what to do." And then I went to bed. And this time, I actually slept. I dreamed about DECEIVE, not the corridor, not the moment he collapsed. Something earlier. I dreamed him sitting at a desk somewhere, place surrounded by data and records and centuries of careful, quiet work, writing the note that would one day be translated by a 26-year-old cryptographer from Cardiff, in a room on a space station orbiting a planet with a beautiful name. I dreamed him patient and tired, and absolutely certain, the way people are certain when they have finally decided to do the thing they have been building toward their whole lives. I woke up, and it was day 47. The Grand Assembly convened at 10 in the morning, station time. It was held in the Conclave's formal chamber, which was the largest room on the Vela Primus. It was a beautiful room. The ceiling was high and curved, made of a material that filtered starlight, so the room was always gently lit from above, as if you were sitting just below the surface of a very clear sea. Around the walls, the emblems of every member species were displayed in their own colors and shapes. But there was a place near the bottom of the east wall, where a new emblem would be mounted after today. It was round and blue-green. It was Earth's. The chamber held approximately 200 beings, representing all member species and their diplomatic staffs. Every seat was filled. The Conclave's senior council sat at the head of the room on a raised platform. Cecil Vane was at the center, his 6-limbed frame composed and still, his almost human face calm and expectant. This was, officially, the pre-ceremony integration review, a formality before the formal signing in 6 days, a chance for humanity to express its gratitude and its readiness. I was scheduled to speak for approximately 8 minutes. I walked to the podium at the center of the chamber floor, and I looked out at 200 beings, and I began. 5,000 years ago, I said, the Conclave created a document it has never published. It governs how this organization treats every species it welcomes. It is called the Managed Species Accord. The room was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then it was a different kind of silent, the kind that happens when 200 beings all stop breathing at the same moment. I did not look at Cecil Vane. I kept my eyes on the room. Under this accord, I continued, 14 species currently present in this chamber have been inducted into the Conclave, not as equal partners but as managed subjects. They were given technology designed to keep them dependent. They were never told the truth about the nature of their membership. They were shown what happened to the Cathara, as a warning against resistance. I paused. Humanity was inducted under this same accord 6 weeks ago. We were classified as high volatile potential before our delegation ever set foot on this station. I reached into my jacket and produced a small device. I pressed it once. Every screen in the Grand Assembly chamber lit up simultaneously. The records from DECEIVE's chip, formatted for readability, displayed in Galactic Standard Script alongside translations in 12 languages. The statistical study from the archive began playing on a loop in the upper corners, and at the bottom of every screen, a timestamp, already rolling, showing that in 2 minutes, the sealed filing in the Galactic Archive would open automatically, permanently, and completely beyond anyone's ability to close. These records, I said, are currently being transmitted to every active communication node in the Galactic Archive network. They will be accessible to every species with archive access within the hour. We did not bring them here to threaten anyone. We brought them here because the beings in this room who have been lied to for centuries deserve to hear the truth in a place where they can see each other's faces when they hear it. Now I looked at Cecil Vane. He was looking back at me. His 6 hands were folded on the table in front of him. He was very still. "High Arbiter," I said. "I understand you may wish to activate the control layer in the FTL drives provided to Earth's fleet." Something very small moved in his face. "You are welcome to try," I said. I did not say it with anger. I said it the way you say something that is simply true. He looked to his left, where his technical officer was seated. The technical officer's hands moved over a console, then stopped. Choose moved again. Stopped. The technical officer looked at Cecil Vane with an expression that did not need translation. The room began to move. Not physically, in the way rooms move when the shared understanding inside them shifts all at once. I had been in rooms like this before. They were rare. They were unforgettable. To my left, the delegation from the Orathi stood up. The Orathi were one of the oldest managed species in the Conclave, inducted 2,000 years ago. Their senior diplomat, an elderly being named Varas, looked at Cecil Vane for a long moment before speaking. What she said, in her own language, the translation running through my earpiece, was this: "We have known for 400 years. We stayed silent because we believed silence was survival. We were wrong. We stayed silent because we were afraid. That ends today." To my right, the Fanathi delegation rose, then the Threel. The third managed species Lena had contacted, the ones who had needed time, the Pelhari, rose last of all, and their delegate was shaking slightly, but they rose. 4 species, standing up in the Grand Assembly Chamber, in front of the entire conclave, in front of every camera and recording device, streaming to the archive right now. I looked at Cecil Vane for the last time. His face was very still, not the practiced stillness of a diplomat, the kind that happens when the thing you have spent your entire career building is rearranging itself in front of you, and there is nothing left to say. He did not speak. I had not expected him to. There was nothing to say. The truth was out. It had been filed, archived, transmitted, and witnessed. No amount of management could put it back. No shot had been fired. No fleet had moved into attack position. The 47 human ships that had exited FTL at visible points near Conclave infrastructure an hour ago had done so on orders to hold position and be seen. Nothing more. They were not a threat. They were a fact. They were humanity saying, "We know where everything is, and we are not afraid." The Conclave did not fall that day. That is important to say clearly. It fractured, badly, along lines that had been under pressure for centuries. But it did not collapse. The machinery of galactic governance does not shut down in a morning, and we had never wanted it to. A collapsed conclave helps no one. 14 species suddenly stripped of all infrastructure support would be a catastrophe, and we were not in the business of causing catastrophes. What we were in the business of, as it turned out, was writing things down. In the weeks that followed, the conclave's governing council split into 3 factions. The reformers, who had never been comfortable with the managed accord, but had never found a way to oppose it, emerged loudly and immediately. They had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. The traditionalists, who believed the accord was a necessary evil that had maintained galactic stability for millennia, were loud too, but their argument had a problem now. Their argument had always relied on no one knowing. Once everyone knew, the argument became something different, not a justification. A confession. The third faction did not argue. They resigned. Cecil Vane was removed from his position by the conclave's own internal review process. I was called to testify before the review panel. I testified for 2 days. I described everything, from the moment in Corridor 7 to the moment in the Grand Assembly Chamber. I described DECEIVE. I described what he had done, and what it had cost him, and what he had hoped for when he pressed that chip into the hand of a human commander in a service passage with a blind surveillance angle. At the end of my testimony, one of the review panel members, a species I had not met before, asked me a question that surprised me. She asked, "How did humanity know it could trust itself enough to wait 47 days? I thought about it. "We didn't know," I said. "We hoped. And then we built something solid enough that the hope had something to stand on." I paused. "That's mostly what we do." The first accord was ratified 4 months later. It was the first piece of galactic law to be created and published simultaneously across all archive networks, so that no species could claim they had not seen it, and no governing body could seal it or restrict it. It was 7 paragraphs long, and it said, in language that all 14 managed species had contributed to drafting, that no spacefaring civilization would deceive another regarding the nature of their cooperation. It said that every species had the right to know the true terms of any agreement they were party to. It said that the records of the managed accord were now permanently archived, openly accessible, for any species that wanted to read them. In informal usage, across Galactic Standard and a dozen other languages, it was already acquiring a second name. Some called it the Human Clause. Some called it DECEIVE's Rule. I had heard both, and I liked both, for different reasons. On the day the accord was signed, I was back on Earth for the first time in 8 months. I was standing in the UEN Museum of First Contact in Geneva, watching the workers install the display case that would hold DECEIVE's chip. Beside the case, a small plaque had already been mounted. I had written the text myself, submitted it 3 weeks earlier, approved through 17 committees because that is how government works. And now here it was, on a wall in a museum, in a city, on a planet that was no longer alone in the universe, and knew, finally, fully, what that meant. The plaque read, given by an alien who gave everything so that strangers might know the truth. We remembered. A young conclave diplomat found me there, studying the plaque. He was not Yanari. He was from a species I did not know well yet, new to the reformed conclave, not one of the managed species, not one of the old guard. He was young and curious and slightly uncertain, the way people are when they are genuinely learning something rather than performing the act of learning. He asked me, very quietly, how humanity had learned to trust each other enough to coordinate the way we had. 47 days of perfect silence across 8 billion people, while governments and engineering teams and intelligence officers and diplomats all held the same enormous secret and did not break. I looked at the plaque for a moment. We have a long history of not getting things right, I said. We have spent a great deal of time learning from that. And somewhere along the way we figured out that the only way to get through the really hard things is to be honest with each other about what the hard things actually are. He thought about that for a moment. That sounds simple, he said. Most true things do, I said. I left the museum and walked out into the Geneva afternoon, which was cold and bright and smelled like the beginning of winter. I had a flight to catch. There was work to do. The reformed conclave was in the process of building the first genuinely equal interspecies governing body in galactic history, which was the kind of project that required approximately everything, and would probably take decades, and would, along the way, be difficult and imperfect and exhausting. I was looking forward to it enormously. Somewhere in the Vreth Hive records I knew, DECEIVE had a file, a life of work, of watching, of waiting, of choosing, after a very long time being afraid, to trust, of dying in a corridor with 2 words on his lips, and a chip in his hand, and a certainty that the beings he had pressed it into the palm of would not let it be for nothing. We had not let it be for nothing. They broke the oldest rule in the galaxy, and we made sure it would never be an unwritten rule again, because now every species in